Michael, the receptionist, called quietly, stepping into my office with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "There's a man downstairs asking for you. He says he's your brother. He refuses to leave until he sees you." I looked through the glass wall overlooking the city. 53 floors below, thousands of people hurried across the sidewalks, each carrying a story nobody else knew. "I'm Daniel Carter. I'm 47 years old. And 15 years ago, my father looked me in the eyes and said something that permanently divided our family. He had said, 'Your brother deserves the family business more than you.' I still remember how calmly he said it. Not angrily, not emotionally, almost professionally. As if he were discussing inventory instead of his own son. I believed that sentence destroyed my life. Years later, I realized it had actually built it. But this story does not start here. I grew up in a small manufacturing town in Ohio, where almost everyone knew the Carter family. My grandfather had started Carter Industrial Supply in 1968 with a single delivery truck, a rented warehouse, and a loan of $12,000. By the time I was born, the company employed 43 people. When I graduated from high school, it had grown to 118 employees with annual revenue just over $18 million. To outsiders, we looked like the perfect family business. Inside the house, things worked differently. My older brother, Michael, was the obvious heir from the day he was born. He was 3 years older than me, louder than me, more charming than me, and incredibly gifted at making people feel exactly what he wanted them to feel. Teachers loved him. Customers remembered him. Relatives laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. I was quieter. I liked numbers. While Michael loved shaking hands at company picnics, I spent my summers reorganizing inventory spreadsheets, calculating shipping costs, and finding tiny inefficiencies that nobody else noticed. At 16, I built a purchasing model that reduced excess inventory by 11.8%. At 19, during my sophomore year studying industrial engineering, I redesigned part of the warehouse layout during winter break. Loading times dropped from an average of 38 minutes per truck to just under 26. Nobody celebrated. Dad simply nodded. Good. That was usually the entire conversation. Michael, meanwhile, would bring in one new customer worth $20,000 a year, and the whole office would clap. I wasn't jealous. Not then. I genuinely believed every family needed different people. Some people opened doors. Others built the house behind them. Unfortunately, my father only admired the people opening doors. His name was Richard Carter. He was 68 when everything fell apart. People often describe men like him as unfair. I don't think that's accurate. He had a very consistent philosophy. He believed leadership was confidence. He believed business was relationships. He believed hesitation looked like weakness. Michael fit that image perfectly. I didn't. To him, competence without charisma was invisible. Looking back, I understand him much better than I did back then. Understanding someone, however, doesn't erase what they choose to do. My mother, Helen, tried to keep peace inside the family. She wasn't weak. She simply believed conflict always cost more than silence. Whenever Dad overlooked my work, she'd quietly tell me while washing dishes. He notices more than he says. I wanted to believe her. For years I did. Then there was one memory that stayed with me longer than any speech Dad ever gave. I was 10. Michael was 13. Grandpa had given us both identical wooden toolboxes as Christmas presents. Mine was carefully organized within a week. Every screwdriver had its place. Every wrench was polished. Michael's toolbox became a mess almost immediately. 3 months later, Grandpa asked where a certain antique wrench was. Michael couldn't find it. After nearly an hour of searching, I remembered seeing it mixed into one of his compartments. I handed it back. Grandpa smiled. Daniel always notices the little things. Before I could feel proud, Dad laughed. The little things don't build companies. Everyone laughed with him. Even Grandpa. I laughed too. Because that's what children do when they're trying to belong. Years later, I realized something. The company eventually collapsed because nobody was paying attention to the little things. That Christmas conversation had predicted our future more accurately than anyone realized. After college, I joined Carter Industrial Supply full-time. I wasn't given a management title. I earned one. Within 4 years, I supervised warehouse operations, purchasing, logistics, and vendor negotiations. We reduced operating costs by nearly $2.7 million across 36 months. Inventory accuracy reached 99.4%. Late deliveries dropped by 41%. Employee turnover in warehouse operations fell almost in half. I didn't accomplish those things alone. Great employees did. I simply listened to them. Forklift operators knew problems executives never saw. Truck drivers noticed supplier patterns before accountants did. Receptionists heard customer complaints long before quarterly reports reflected them. Leadership, I learned, wasn't speaking first. It was listening long enough for other people to tell you what mattered. Ironically, those were exactly the qualities my father interpreted as weakness. Meanwhile, Michael became executive vice president. He traveled, played golf with clients, attended conferences, hosted dinners. Every company newsletter featured his photograph. Mine appeared only when someone accidentally included the operations department in a group picture. Again, I wasn't bitter. Not yet. Because I believed results eventually spoke louder than personalities. I was wrong. Results speak, but only if someone is willing to hear them. The first warning came during a board meeting when I presented a detailed expansion proposal. For 14 months, I had researched acquiring a smaller regional distributor with 18 employees. The numbers were conservative. The risks were manageable. The acquisition would increase our distribution footprint by almost 30% without taking on dangerous debt. I had prepared a 78-page report. Michael walked in 10 minutes late. He skimmed exactly 2 pages. Then smiled. Interesting. Dad looked at him. What do you think? Michael leaned back. I think we're thinking too small. Everyone turned toward him. We don't buy regional companies. He grinned confidently. We become national. No spreadsheets. No analysis. No financing plan. Just one sentence. Dad nodded immediately. That's vision. My report wasn't rejected because it was flawed. It was rejected because it sounded careful. That afternoon, while everyone congratulated Michael for thinking big, our chief financial officer quietly stopped by my office. He closed the door. You know your proposal was better. I smiled. It doesn't matter. He looked at me for several seconds. It will. At the time, neither of us knew just how right he was. About 6 months later, the moment I had spent nearly 15 years preparing for finally arrived. My father called a family meeting on a Thursday evening. Not at home. In the executive conference room, overlooking the warehouse floor. That detail mattered. Family conversations happened around the dining table. Business conversations happened there. When I walked in, every chair was already occupied. My mother sat quietly near the window, her hands folded together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Michael leaned back confidently, one arm resting across the empty chair beside him. Our company's attorney had a thick leather folder in front of him. The accountant was there too. So were 2 outside board members. This wasn't a discussion. It was a decision. Dad waited until I sat down. Then he cleared his throat. I've spent the last year thinking about succession. No one interrupted. I'll be retiring at the end of this fiscal year. Michael smiled before anyone else reacted. Dad noticed. He smiled back. That was the first answer in the room. The company needs one leader. Another pause. I've decided Michael will become president and chief executive officer. The room remained silent. Not because everyone was surprised. Because everyone except me already knew. I looked toward my mother. She lowered her eyes. She had known too. Dad turned toward me. Daniel. His voice softened. You've always been dependable. Whenever someone begins a sentence by praising your character, experience teaches you to prepare for disappointment. You've been an excellent operations manager. An operations manager. After everything. After 12 years. After helping modernize nearly every system inside the company. Operations manager. But leadership requires something different. He wasn't trying to hurt me. That made it worse. He genuinely believed what he was saying. Michael crossed one leg over the other without looking at me. Dad continued. Your brother deserves the family business more than you. The sentence landed with almost no emotion. No anger. No apology. Just certainty. He connects with people. He inspires confidence. He sees opportunities. Then Dad looked directly into my eyes. You make things run efficiently. There it was. My entire career summarized into one sentence. Not the person who built systems. Not the person employees trusted. Not the person suppliers called first when problems appeared. The man who made things run efficiently. As though I were another machine inside the warehouse. The attorney opened the leather folder. There are several documents requiring signatures. My copy contained exactly 17 pages. Most of them dealt with ownership restructuring. The final page caught my attention immediately. According to the agreement, Michael would receive 80% of the company shares. Dad would retain 20% until retirement. My shares? 0. Instead, I would receive a severance package, equivalent to 18 months of salary, if I chose to leave. If I stayed, I would continue reporting directly to Michael. I read every line. Twice. The room became impatient. Michael finally laughed. You always read everything. I looked up. So should you. He shrugged. I trust our attorney. I trust documents. For a split second, something crossed the attorney's face. Not guilt. Discomfort. Tiny. Almost invisible. But I noticed. I always notice the little things. I flipped back 3 pages. There was an attachment referenced as Schedule C. It wasn't included. I think a document is missing. Dad sighed. It's standard language. The attachment isn't here. The attorney quickly opened his folder. It's probably a copying mistake. Probably. Not definitely. Just probably. He handed me another copy. This one included Schedule C. I compared both versions. Word by word. Paragraph by paragraphs. Most people would have signed after seeing the missing attachment added. I kept reading. Then I found it. A clause describing ownership of an internal logistics optimization platform. My platform. Over 7 years, I had personally developed a proprietary inventory forecasting system. Not on company time. At home. Nights. Weekends. I had paid for outside software consultants myself. The copyrights had never been transferred. The attorney's document now stated that all related intellectual property automatically became company assets. I looked at him. When was this added? He blinked. It's the standard. It wasn't in the earlier draft. Silence. Michael answered before the attorney could. It makes sense. No. I slid both versions across the table. It wasn't there. Dad frowned. Daniel. This clause wasn't there. The attorney adjusted his glasses. It was incorporated during final revisions. Without notifying me. It's standard practice. I smiled for the first time that evening. No, it isn't. Because I had negotiated enough contracts to know exactly what standard practice looked like. Dad's patience disappeared. This is exactly what I mean. I met his eyes. What do you mean? You get trapped in details. I looked down at the two contracts. Maybe details were where truth usually hid. I closed the folder gently. I'm not signing tonight. Michael laughed openly. Seriously. I'll have my attorney review it. Dad's expression hardened. So you don't trust your own family? I trust paper more than promises. Those words changed everything. Dad stood. If you walk out today. He stopped speaking for several seconds. Don't expect another opportunity. I slowly gathered the documents. I wasn't offered one. Nobody spoke as I walked toward the door. Just before reaching it, I heard Michael behind me. You'll regret this. I turned once. No, I'll remember it. I left Carter Industrial Supply carrying nothing except a briefcase, 2 copies of a contract, and a quiet feeling I couldn't yet explain. It wasn't anger. It wasn't grief. It was instinct. Something inside me kept returning to that added clause. Someone had wanted my software. Not my leadership. Not my experience. My system. That realization would eventually become the single most expensive mistake my brother ever made. The next morning I woke up at 5 to 10 a.m. For the first time in nearly 13 years, I didn't have anywhere I was expected to be. No warehouse to inspect. No production meeting at 7. No supplier conference call. The silence felt unfamiliar. People often imagine that losing everything happens in one dramatic moment. It doesn't. It happens in hundreds of ordinary moments afterward. You reach for an employee badge that no longer works. You check emails that stop arriving. You drive toward the office before realizing you no longer belong there. Those small moments hurt more than the big announcement ever did. Around 9 that morning, my phone rang. It was Karen, the company's controller. She rarely called unless something truly mattered. I shouldn't be calling. You don't have to. I just wanted you to know. She hesitated. Half the warehouse staff asked where you were this morning. I smiled. They'll be fine. No, they're worried. That surprised me. I had never thought of myself as especially important. Karen continued. 3 supervisors asked whether you resigned. What did you tell them? The truth. Which is that I don't actually know. After we hung up, I sat staring at the notebook on my kitchen table. For years I had filled dozens of notebooks with ideas. Warehouse layouts. Inventory forecasting. Supplier risk models. Transportation optimization. None of them belonged to Carter Industrial Supply. Every page had been written at home. Every algorithm had been developed on my own computer. Every improvement was mine. That afternoon I called an intellectual property attorney. His name was Victor Lang. He spent nearly 4 hours reviewing every document I had brought. Finally he leaned back. You did something very unusual. What? You kept records. I laughed. I organize everything. I noticed. He pointed toward 3 storage boxes I'd carried into his office. These journals alone are worth more than most people realize. Every notebook was dated. Every software revision was archived. Every invoice from freelance programmers had been preserved. Every email discussing development had been backed up. He looked at me seriously. If someone tries claiming ownership. He tapped the boxes. These will matter. Then he asked one question that changed the direction of my life. What do you actually want? I expected him to ask whether I wanted to sue. Instead, he asked what I wanted. I thought carefully before answering. I don't want revenge. He nodded. I believe you. I just don't want someone else taking credit for work they didn't do. Victor smiled. That's a much stronger position. Over the next 3 months, we filed copyright registrations, patent applications where appropriate, and formal documentation establishing ownership of every piece of software I had personally developed. It wasn't glamorous work. Mostly paperwork. Phone calls. Documentation. Receipt. Dates. The little things. Meanwhile, Carter Industrial Supply announced Michael as its new CEO with a glossy marketing campaign. His photograph appeared on local business magazines. The headline read, "A New Generation of Leadership." Friends kept sending me copies. I thanked them, then threw them away. I had stopped measuring my future against my family's opinion. Or at least, I was trying to. Finding work at 42 wasn't easy. Every interview eventually reached the same question. Why did you leave your family business? How do you answer that? My father chose my brother. It sounded childish. So I answered honestly. I believed it was time to build something of my own. One interview changed everything. A logistics company from Chicago had been searching for someone to reduce distribution costs across 8 regional warehouses. Instead of talking about myself for an hour, I asked them questions. How often were deliveries late? Where were inventory errors occurring? What software were they using? The CEO eventually laughed. You're interviewing us. I smiled. I'm trying to understand the problem. He hired me 2 days later. Not because of my resume. Because of my questions. Within 18 months, distribution costs dropped by 16%. Inventory losses fell by almost half. The company expanded from 8 warehouses to 11. For the first time in my professional life, my work wasn't competing with my brother's personality. It was simply being evaluated on its results. That experience taught me something I wish I'd understood much earlier. Sometimes you're not failing. You're simply standing in a room where people have already decided who you are. Changing rooms changes everything. 3 years later, I became Chief Operating Officer. 5 years after that, I partnered with 2 former colleagues to launch our own logistics technology company. We didn't manufacture products. We built systems, software that predicted inventory shortages before they happened. Models that identified supplier risks months in advance. Optimization platforms that saved distributors millions of dollars. The same type of work my father once dismissed as the little things. Our first year, revenue reached $2.4 million. The second year, $8.9 million. By year 6, we operated in 14 states. By year 10, our software supported more than 300 distribution centers. Success arrived quietly. No newspaper headlines. No family celebrations. Just customers renewing contracts because the systems actually worked. Occasionally, I heard news about Carter Industrial Supply. Michael expanded aggressively. He borrowed heavily. Opened new facilities faster than experienced managers could staff them. He loved announcing growth. Less attention was paid to whether that growth made financial sense. Whenever someone asked my opinion, I always gave the same answer. I hope they succeed. People assumed I was being polite. I meant it. Despite everything. It was still my grandfather's company. I didn't want to see it disappear. But businesses don't survive on hope. They survive on discipline. And discipline is usually built one small decision at a time. The very decisions my father had spent a lifetime teaching everyone to ignore. About 11 years after I left, the first real cracks became visible. Not in the newspapers. Not in industry magazines. In payment schedules. One of our finance managers walked into my office carrying a report. "Daniel, have you noticed this company?" He pointed to a familiar name. Carter Industrial Supply. I hadn't realized they had become one of our software clients through a third-party distributor. I looked closer. Invoices that had always been paid within 30 days were now arriving 45. Then 60. Then 72 days late. That wasn't proof of trouble. But it was a signal. Healthy companies rarely begin missing payment deadlines without a reason. I closed the report. Treat them like every other customer. No exceptions. No exceptions. He nodded. That policy applied to everyone. Friends. Former competitors. Even family. Rules only matter when they apply equally. Over the following 2 years, more signs appeared. 3 longtime suppliers quietly stopped extending generous credit terms. A regional warehouse was sold. Then another. Several experienced managers resigned within the same 6-month period. None of those events guaranteed failure. Together, they painted a picture I recognized all too well. The little things. One Friday afternoon, I received a call from Karen. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 5 years. She had finally retired. "I thought you should know." Her voice sounded older. "Your father isn't well." I closed my office door. "How bad?" "He doesn't come into the office anymore." "And Michael?" She sighed. "He's trying." That answer stayed with me. Not succeeding. Trying. There was an important difference. Karen continued quietly. "Your brother isn't your father." "I know." He genuinely believed he could grow the company. "I know." He made mistakes. So did all of us. After we ended the call, I sat alone for several minutes. It would have been easy to imagine Michael as a villain. Reality was more complicated. He had inherited enormous expectations. A company with nearly 200 employees. A father everyone wanted to impress. A family legacy. And a belief reinforced since childhood that confidence alone could solve problems. That wasn't arrogance alone. It was conditioning. My father had spent decades rewarding bold promises more than careful preparation. Michael simply became the leader he had been taught to become. Unfortunately, markets don't reward the same things families do. About 3 years later, the headlines finally appeared. Carter Industrial Supply announces major restructuring. Then, regional facilities to close. Then, debt negotiations continue. Every article described the situation differently. I didn't need the articles. The numbers were enough. One rainy Tuesday morning, my assistant entered my office. "There's someone downstairs asking for you." I didn't look up immediately. "Do they have an appointment?" "No." "Who is it?" She hesitated. "He says his name is Michael Carter." The room suddenly became very quiet. 15 years. 15 years without a visit. Without a phone call. Without an apology. Without even a birthday card. I walked to the window. Down in the lobby, I could see him through the glass. He looked smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence that had once filled every room now seemed replaced by exhaustion. I took a slow breath. Send him up. 10 minutes later, he stepped into my office. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Grey had replaced much of his dark hair. The expensive suits were gone. His shoulders curved slightly forward. Time had introduced itself to both of us. "Daniel." "Michael." He looked around the office. "The awards on the wall." The engineers discussing projects through the glass conference room. The city skyline behind my desk. Finally, he smiled weakly. You've done well. So have you. He laughed once. No, I haven't. Honesty. It was the first thing he'd brought into the room. I appreciated that. I offered him coffee. He accepted. We spent almost 15 minutes talking about ordinary things. Our mother. Old employees. His children. My daughter. Everything except the real reason he had come. Eventually, he placed a thin folder on my desk. I need your help. I looked at it but didn't open it. Our lenders have given us 90 days. He swallowed. We need liquidity. How much? $28 million. He said the number quietly, as if speaking it louder would somehow make it larger. I've spoken to every bank. They've all refused. He looked directly at me. I know we're not family anymore. I didn't interrupt. But I'm asking business to business. I need a loan. The room became silent again. 15 years earlier. I had walked out carrying nothing except a briefcase and 2 contracts. Now my brother was sitting across from me asking for $28 million. Life has an unusual sense of symmetry. I slowly opened the folder. Financial statements. Cash flow projections. Outstanding debt. Supplier obligations. Everything was organized. For a moment I almost smiled. Someone inside his company had finally started paying attention to the details. Unfortunately, sometimes details arrive too late. I closed the folder gently. Michael watched my face. I know what you're thinking. Do you? You finally won. I shook my head. There was never a competition. He looked down. I spent years believing there was. Neither of us spoke. Then I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk. Not for a check. Not for a calculator. Not even for the loan documents. I removed a weathered brown envelope. The paper had faded after 15 years. The corners were worn. I placed it carefully between us. Michael frowned. What is this? I slid the contents onto the desk. 2 contracts. 1 missing Schedule C. 1 with Schedule C inserted. His expression changed instantly. He recognized them. The originals. Yes. He stared at the documents without touching them. For the first time since entering my office. His hands began to shake. Michael didn't say a word for nearly a minute. He simply stared at the 2 contracts as though they belonged to someone else. Finally, he looked up. You kept them. I keep everything. A tired smile crossed his face. I should have remembered that. He reached toward the papers but stopped before touching them. I never actually saw these versions. I know. His eyes lifted slowly. Yous know. I spent 15 years thinking about that meeting. I eventually realized something. I tapped the missing clause. This wasn't your style. He frowned. What do you mean? You were impulsive. You liked big announcements. You hated paperwork. If someone had asked you to read this contract line by line, you would have handed it back after 2 minutes. He gave a quiet laugh. That's fair. So I stopped believing you inserted the clause. His expression became serious. You think Dad did? I shook my head. No, your father trusted people too easily. The attorney. I nodded once. I think he believed he was protecting the company. Michael leaned back slowly. He always said intellectual property created by executives belonged to the business. Legally, that's not always true. Especially not when the work was independently developed, privately funded, and carefully documented. Michael closed his eyes. You know, he spoke so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I never understood why you walked away. I thought you were angry because Dad picked me. I was disappointed. But that wasn't why I left. I pushed the contract slightly closer. I left because someone tried to take something that wasn't theirs. He nodded without arguing. After another long silence, he asked the question I had expected since he walked into the room. So, are you refusing the loan? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened another folder. This one contained a complete financial analysis of Carter Industrial Supply. His eyebrows lifted. You already reviewed us. We review every major client. He gave a tired laugh. Of course you do. I turned several pages toward him. Your debt isn't the real problem. It isn't. No, your systems are. He looked confused. I continued. You've expanded into 17 distribution centers. But they're operating as if they're 17 separate companies. Inventory isn't synchronized. Purchasing isn't centralized. 3 facilities are buying identical products from different suppliers at different prices. You're carrying nearly $40 million in unnecessary stock. His eyes widened. How do you know that? Because your vendors know. Because shipping records tell a story. Because numbers always do. He stared at the spreadsheets. Then quietly admitted. We couldn't figure out where the money was disappearing. It wasn't disappearing. It was sitting on warehouse shelves. For nearly an hour we discussed operations. Not childhood. Not family. Not resentment. Business. Real business. When we finished, Michael looked exhausted. If we'd fixed this 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't be here today. He nodded. I know. Then he surprised me. I'm sorry. Just 2 words. No excuses. No explanation. No attempt to blame our father. I'm sorry. There are apologies people rehearse. And there are apologies people finally grow into. This was the second kind. I believed I earned everything. He looked down at his hands. I never asked what it cost you. I could hear the sincerity in his voice. That didn't erase 15 years. But it mattered. More than I expected. He looked back at me. So, what happens now? I stood and walked to the window. The city looked much the same as it had that morning. Thousands of people building lives one ordinary decision at a time. Without turning around, I said, if I lend you $28 million, it won't save the company. Behind me, the room stayed silent. The problems are structural. You'll be in the same position 18 months from now. When I turned back, disappointment was already visible on his face. Then I continued. But, hope returned cautiously. I'm willing to invest. He blinked. Invest. Not in the company as it exists. In what it could become. He looked confused. I slid a blank sheet of paper toward him. I have conditions. He nodded immediately. Anything. I smiled. No, not anything. You'll read every condition before answering. For the first time in years. My brother actually laughed. A genuine laugh. I deserved that. The conditions weren't about revenge. They weren't about humiliating him. They were about changing the system that had broken our family in the first place. Every executive appointment would require independent board approval. Financial reporting would become completely transparent. Outside audits every year. Profit sharing for long-term employees. Leadership development based on measurable performance, not family relationships. No automatic inheritance of executive positions. No exceptions. Finally, there was one last condition. I pointed to the final paragraph. Michael read it twice. Then looked up. You want the old company name retired? I do. He frowned. Why? Because your company isn't really Grandpa's company anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. We shouldn't pretend otherwise. He sat quietly for several moments. Then he picked up the pen. Without negotiating a single sentence. He signed. As he placed the pen down, he smiled sadly. You know what hurts the most? What? Dad thought giving me everything was protecting the business. He looked around my office. In reality, he protected the wrong son. I shook my head. No, he underestimated both of us. He underestimated me. And he overestimated what carrying his name could accomplish for you. A few months later, the restructuring was completed. The old Carter Industrial Supply officially ceased operating under its original structure. A new company emerged. Smaller, healthier, better managed. Many employees kept their jobs. Several warehouses were saved. Not because one brother defeated another, but because, after 15 years, both finally learned the lesson our grandfather had unknowingly tried to teach us. A company isn't built by the loudest voice in the room. It's built by the thousands of small decisions nobody applauds. My father spent his life believing success belonged to the person who looked most like a leader. Life eventually taught us that real leadership belongs to the person who keeps paying attention when everyone else stops looking. Looking back now, I don't think my family's story was ever about favoritism. It was about a system. A system that confused confidence with competence. Charm with character. Inheritance with qualification. That system didn't only cost my father his company. It almost cost him both of his sons. If this story made you think about someone in your own life, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because your strengths weren't the loudest in the room? Subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. The story could have ended there. Most people would probably want it to. The struggling brother admits he was wrong. The overlooked brother succeeds. The business survives in a healthier form. Everyone moves on. Real life rarely ends that neatly. About 8 months after the restructuring, I received another phone call. This one came from our mother. Her voice sounded weaker than I had ever heard. Your father wants to see you. I hadn't spoken to him privately in almost 16 years. We had crossed paths at legal meetings. Board discussions. Once at my niece's wedding. Always polite. Never personal. What changed? She answered quietly. I think time. When I arrived at my parents' house, it looked smaller than I remembered. Not because it had changed. Because I had. The oak tree Dad planted when Michael was born now towered over the driveway. The basketball hoop, where we had spent hundreds of afternoons, leaned slightly to one side. The porch swing Mom loved still creaked exactly the same way. Some places preserve memories better than photographs. Dad was sitting alone in the backyard. He had lost weight. His shoulders, once impossibly broad, seemed almost fragile. Age has a way of removing the things people once hid behind. He looked up as I approached. You came. You asked. He nodded toward the empty chair beside him. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply overdue. Finally, he broke it. I was proud of you. I looked at him. That's an interesting sentence. He smiled sadly. I know. You never said it. No, you rarely showed it. No, why? He looked out across the yard before answering. Because I thought praise made people comfortable. I wanted you to stay hungry. I almost laughed. You succeeded. He nodded. I know. Then he surprised me. I was harder on you because I thought you could take it. I thought about that. Parents often justify unequal treatment with unequal expectations. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're simply explaining pain after the fact. I didn't need less encouragement because I was stronger. I said it calmly. I needed it because I was your son. And his eyes filled with tears. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen my father cry. I know. Those 2 words carried more weight than any speech he could have given. He wiped his eyes. I kept telling myself I'd fix it later. After retirement. After the company stabilized. After. He stopped. There is always an after. Until there isn't. I know. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and removed an old brass key. I recognized it immediately. Grandpa's office. The original office. The one preserved inside the old headquarters after everyone else had moved into the new building. I want you to have this. I looked at the key but didn't reach for it. Why? Because it should have been yours years ago. I finally accepted it. Not because it unlocked a room. Because it represented something my father had never been able to give before. Recognition. Not of success. Of truth. A few weeks later, Michael and I visited that old office together. Dust covered the bookshelves. Grandpa's drafting table still stood near the window. On one wall hung a faded photograph from 1968. A pickup truck. 3 employees. 1 rented warehouse. Grandpa used to say the company wasn't built on money. It was built on trust. Standing there, both of us realized something. The company had never actually failed because of debt. Debt was only the final chapter. It had begun failing years earlier. The moment trust inside the family became conditional. Michael looked around the room. You know, if Dad had chosen you back then. I interrupted him gently. We'd probably have found different ways to make mistakes. He smiled. Probably. No family gets everything right. No, but every family gets another chance to choose what happens next. That, more than any contract or loan, became the real inheritance our father eventually left us. Not the buildings. Not the shares. Not the money. The opportunity to stop passing the same broken system to the next generation. Today, when I watch my daughter and my nephew work together, I never ask which one deserves more. I ask different questions. Who prepared better? Who listened more carefully? Who earned the responsibility? Talent opens doors. Character keeps them open. And the little things. The little things build everything. Years later, after my father passed away peacefully at the age of 84, people asked me the same question over and over. Did the 2 of you ever truly reconcile? I never knew how to answer it in one sentence. Reconciliation isn't a single conversation. It isn't one apology. It isn't one hug at a funeral. It's 1,000 ordinary choices to stop carrying yesterday into tomorrow. At my father's memorial service, nearly 300 people came. Former employees. Suppliers. Drivers who had retired decades earlier. Neighbors. Friends. Some had known him as a brilliant businessman. Others remembered him as the man who coached Little League every Saturday for 12 straight years. Human beings are complicated. The people who wound us most deeply are rarely made of only their worst decisions. After the service, an elderly man approached me with a cane. It took me several seconds to recognize him. It was Frank, the forklift operator who had trained me during my first summer in the warehouse. He was 81 now. His handshake was weaker than I remembered. His smile wasn't. You finally got your office. I laughed softly. I guess I did. He shook his head. No, you earned it a long time ago. Then he said something that stayed with me. We all knew. What do you mean? We knew who solved the problems. We also knew who got the credit. I stood there quietly. For years I had believed no one noticed. Frank smiled. Don't confuse silence with blindness. Then he slowly walked away. That conversation changed how I remembered those years. I had spent so much time believing I was invisible that I never considered people had been watching all along. Sometimes employees stay silent because they aren't in a position to change the decision. Not because they agree with it. Several months later, Michael invited me to speak at the leadership conference our rebuilt company held every year. About 200 managers attended. Many were young enough not to remember the old Carter industrial supply. They only knew the healthier company that existed now. Michael introduced me with one sentence. My brother taught me that confidence should never replace preparation. Then he stepped away from the podium. No long introduction. No attempt to rewrite history. Just the truth. When I stood before those managers, I didn't tell them about family arguments. I didn't mention inheritance. I didn't mention the contract. Instead, I held up a simple clipboard. This, I said, is one of the most powerful leadership tools you'll ever own. People laughed. They expected something more impressive. It's just a checklist. Exactly. The room became quiet. Businesses rarely collapse because of one giant mistake. They collapse because hundreds of small problems go unnoticed until they become one giant mistake. Afterward, dozens of managers came to ask questions. Not about my family's story. About systems. About culture. About trust. Those conversations mattered more to me than any business award ever had. Because they meant the lesson would outlive the people who learned it the hard way. Every once in a while, I still open the safe in my office. Inside, among legal papers and old photographs, sits a worn brown envelope. The original contracts are still there. People sometimes ask why I haven't thrown them away. Because they remind me of two different truths. The first is that details matter. The second is that bitterness is a choice. For years, I thought those papers represented betrayal. Today, they represent a turning point. If I had signed that contract, I might have stayed. If I had stayed, I might never have discovered who I was outside my father's expectations. Losing the inheritance forced me to build something no one could take away. My own judgment. My own reputation. My own life. Looking back, I no longer wish my father had chosen differently. I only wish he had understood sooner that love doesn't have to be rationed, and respect doesn't have to be inherited. Both can be earned. And both grow stronger when they're shared instead of assigned. That's the lesson I carry forward every single day. Not because my family was perfect, but because we finally stopped pretending that perfection was the goal. We chose something better. We chose to tell the truth, accept responsibility, and build the future one small decision at a time. Just like my grandfather did with one truck, one warehouse, and one opportunity that became a legacy. Not because it was handed to someone, but because someone was willing to earn it every single day. One autumn afternoon, nearly 20 years after I had walked out of my father's conference room with nothing but a briefcase and 2 contracts, I found myself standing in front of a group of 32 interns. Most of them were in their early 20s. Bright, ambitious, confident. They reminded me of my brother and me before life had separated us into different paths. One young man raised his hand. Mr. Carter, can I ask a personal question? You can ask. You don't have to answer. The room laughed. He hesitated. If you could go back, would you fight harder for the family business? I smiled. 20 years earlier, I would have answered immediately. Now I took my time. No, the room grew quiet. I would fight harder for the relationship. Several people looked surprised. The business was never the real loss. The relationship was. I explained something I wished someone had explained to me when I was their age. When you're young, you think success is getting the position you deserve. When you're older, you realize success is becoming the kind of person whose peace doesn't depend on someone else's decision. After the session ended, that same intern stayed behind. My father owns a construction company. I nodded. He wants my older brother to take over. I could hear the worry in his voice. What should I do? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked him a question. What do you actually want? He looked confused. I don't know. Then don't spend 5 years fighting for something you haven't decided you even want. He stood there thinking. Too many people inherit expectations before they discover their own ambitions. I wasn't going to encourage that. As he left, he turned back. Thank you. I smiled. I hope you build something that belongs to you. Whether that's inside your family's business or somewhere else. Months later, I drove past the original Carter warehouse. The building had been converted into a community technical training center. The loading docks where trucks once lined up now welcomed students learning welding, machining, logistics and industrial maintenance. I walked inside quietly. The instructor didn't recognize me. He simply welcomed me like any other visitor. Near the entrance hung a bronze plaque. It read, "This center exists because skilled work deserves skilled people." No mention of our family. No mention of the company. No mention of the conflict. Just an idea. For some reason, I liked that better. Legacies shouldn't depend on surnames. They should depend on what continues helping people long after we're gone. As I turned to leave, I noticed 2 young apprentices arguing over a warehouse layout drawn on a whiteboard. One insisted the fastest route was obvious. The other quietly pointed out 3 small bottlenecks everyone else had missed. I couldn't help smiling. The little things. Always the little things. Some lessons never change. Neither do the people willing to notice them. When I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. Dinner on Sunday, Mom's making your favorite pie. No discussion of business. No financial reports. No board meetings. Just dinner. I typed one word. Absolutely. For years, I thought justice meant getting back what had been taken from me. Now I understand something different. Justice isn't always receiving what you lost. Sometimes it's becoming someone who no longer needs it. And in the end, that was worth far more than the family business ever could have been. Sunday dinners slowly became a tradition again. Not every week. Life was too busy for that. But often enough that they stopped feeling unusual. Mom insisted on cooking far more food than anyone could possibly eat. Michael always arrived 10 minutes late. I still arrived 10 minutes early. Some habits never disappear. One evening, my nephew Ethan, who had just turned 23, asked a question while everyone was clearing the table. "Uncle Daniel, were you ever angry at Grandpa?" The room became quiet. Michael looked down at his plate. Mom stopped drying a glass. Even Dad's old chair, still kept in its place after his passing, seemed to make the silence heavier. I answered honestly. Yes, for a long time. Ethan nodded. What changed? I got busy building a life. He looked confused. I smiled. Anger requires maintenance. You have to feed it. You have to replay old conversations. You have to imagine different endings. Eventually, I became too busy building tomorrow to keep rebuilding yesterday. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Michael quietly added, "I wasn't angry enough." We all looked at him. He continued, "I spent years defending decisions I should have questioned. I thought loyalty meant agreeing. It doesn't. Loyalty sometimes means telling people they're making a mistake. I wished someone had said that to our father 30 years earlier. Perhaps someone had. Perhaps he simply wasn't ready to hear it. A few months later, our company celebrated its 20th anniversary. We invited every employee, from executives to warehouse teams, to the same event. No VIP section. No reserved tables for senior leadership. Everyone sat together. One of our newer managers asked why we insisted on that arrangement every year. I answered with a story. When I was young, I believed titles told you where the important people were. I looked around the room. I was wrong. The important people are the ones solving problems. And problems don't care about job titles. That philosophy shaped every decision we made. Executives spent one day each quarter working in operations. Not pretending. Actually working. Listening. Observing. Learning. New hires could question senior managers without fear. Ideas were evaluated before job titles. Performance reviews included one unusual question. What did you learn from someone whose position is below yours? At first, some executives thought it was strange. After a few years, it became the question that produced the most valuable answers. Because humility scales better than ego. Near the end of that anniversary celebration, an employee approached me. She had worked with us for 14 years. I've always wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. Is it true your family once owned another company? It is. Were you sad when you lost it? I thought about the question carefully. Then I answered. I was sad because I believed losing the company meant losing my future. She smiled. And now I know they were never the same thing. A company can be taken from you. A title can disappear. Money can come and go. But the ability to solve problems, to earn trust, to keep your word, those become part of who you are. No contract can transfer them. No inheritance can replace them. No betrayal can erase them. As the evening ended, I watched hundreds of employees talking, laughing, and exchanging ideas. There were no family dynasties being protected. No sons being compared. No daughters being overlooked. Just people doing meaningful work together. That was the kind of organization I had always wanted to build. Not because it was bigger than my father's company. In fact, at its peak it wasn't. It was simply healthier. And sometimes, healthy is a greater achievement than big. When I locked my office that night, I paused before turning off the lights. For just a moment, I remembered the 27-year-old version of myself walking out of my father's conference room, carrying nothing except a briefcase and 2 contracts. If I could have spoken to that younger man, I wouldn't have told him everything would work out. That wouldn't have been true. Many difficult years still waited for him. Instead, I would have told him something much simpler. Pay attention. The details you're noticing today. The habits you're building today. The integrity you're protecting today. They will become the foundation of a life that no one else's approval will ever control. And that, more than any inheritance, is the greatest wealth a person can ever possess. A year later, I received a handwritten letter instead of an email. Almost nobody sends handwritten letters anymore, which is probably why I noticed it immediately. The return address belonged to a small town in Nebraska. Inside was a single page. Dear Mr. Carter, you don't know me. I watched your leadership interview online 6 months ago. My father owns a farming business. My older sister has always been the favorite because she's louder than I am. I almost quit last year because I thought I'd never be enough. After hearing your story, I stopped trying to compete with her. I started improving our inventory system instead. Last month, we saved almost $180,000 by fixing problems nobody had noticed. My father still hasn't thanked me. But I don't need him to anymore. I just wanted you to know your story changed one family. Thank you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not with the contracts. With the letters that reminded me why our work mattered. Recognition is powerful. but helping someone recognize their own worth is even more valuable. A few weeks later, Michael dropped by my office without an appointment. Unlike the day he had first come asking for help, he wasn't carrying financial reports. He was carrying an old cardboard box. I found these while cleaning out storage. He placed it on my desk. Inside were dozens of photographs. Grandpa standing beside his first truck. Company picnics. Christmas parties. Employees celebrating 20-year anniversaries. Near the bottom was a faded picture of two boys. Michael was 13. I was 10. We were both carrying identical wooden toolboxes. I laughed. I remember this. So do I. He picked up the photographs. You know what I finally realized? What? I lost that wrench on purpose. I looked at him. He smiled sheepishly. I wanted Grandpa to keep looking for me. I couldn't help laughing. You were impossible. I was insecure. That answer caught me off guard. He continued. I always thought everyone expected me to become Dad. I was terrified of disappointing him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I admitted something I had never said aloud. I spent years wishing I were you. He looked at me in disbelief. Seriously? You had Dad's attention. He shook his head slowly. I would have traded half of it for your peace. We both laughed. Life has a strange way of revealing that the people we envy are often carrying burdens we never saw. Before leaving, Michael handed me the photograph. You keep it. Why? Because you remember the little things better than I do. I slipped it back into the box. No, we both remember now. As he walked toward the door, I realized something. The contract I had protected for 15 years had preserved my legal rights. But conversations like this, they preserved something far more difficult to recover. A family. Not the family we once imagined. Not a perfect one. A truthful one. And in the end, truth proved to be the only inheritance strong enough to survive everything else.